Rants. Like and subscribe. Today we getting into a classic episode, right? We're going into the Cosby Show. Season 4, episode 10. Where's Rudy? Right? This is one of the rare episodes of the series where the episode isn't in the house. Okay? I used to love these episodes growing up. Saved by the Bell. I remember they had their one mall episode, and they had those summer vacation episodes. I remember Family Matters. They went to Disney World and Paris. Classic episodes, right? Or what about, when Martin was on a cruise ship? That was a classic episode. But today we're focusing on the Cosby Show, right? And before we even start this rant, we got to ask ourselves, where was this mall located? The show calls it Eastland Mall. But, of course, Rance did his research. And this mall is actually called Paramus Mall, located in Paramus, New Jersey. Yeah, why wouldn't the Huxtables be shopping in Bergen County? Please do your research on Bergen County and understand the Huxtable lifestyle. Now, you also gotta understand that during this time period, America played on wild trauma by placing missing children on milk cartons. So every morning when you're pouring your bowl of sugary cereal, or when your grandmother is baking a cake, you guys are going to be reminded that little Billy is missing in Ohio, and now you no longer have an appetite, right? But that leads us to the actual episode, and we're in a Huxtable household, and we see Cliff walking in, and he says, "Make way for the champion squash." And Claire says, "Oh, come on now, I haven't won any championship yet." We'll know today after the squash contest who the champion is. And Cliff says, "Well, it's just a matter of time before they give you the blue ribbon." And Claire replies, "I admit it's a fine looking squash, but that doesn't mean it's going to be the best one there." And Cliff, he's hyping his fine wife up. He's like, "Let me tell you something. On the evening news, they gonna say, and here is Miss Clair Huxtable, beautiful mother of 5 children. We're here live at Eastland Mall, where the winner of the squash contest is now about to receive the blue ribbon. And then Hollywood will call, and you'll have your own TV show called Let's Talk Squash." And Claire is like, "You're a disturbed man. I'm not entering this contest to become famous. I just want people to see my squash, okay? Now I have to go back outside and I have to turn over my soil." Because, Claire does plant, but we all know Claire don't cook. We know that, right? So then we see Theo, Vanessa, and Rudy walk downstairs and ask, "So when are we leaving for the mall?" And Cliff says, "Oh, about a half an hour from now." And Theo says, "Oh, so I guess I better check the movie schedule." And Vanessa says, "Theo, I'm going to have to pass on the movie. I want to go look at new clothes." And Rudy adds in, "I want to go get some new toys." And Cliff stops him. He's like, No. We're not going to the mall for shopping. We're going there to support your mother in the squash contest." And Theo says, "Dad, don't do this to us. Please don't make us go to the squash contest." And Vanessa says, "Yeah, Saturdays are our only day for fun. Like, we work hard at school all week." And Rudy says, "Yeah, we don't want to look at vegetables." And Cliff says, "First of all, we're talking about support." And he looks at Vanessa and asks, "Do you remember the recital when you played the clarinet? That wonderful clarinet where you broke 4 reeds playing notes backwards? Your mother stood up and clapped for you like you were actually good, And then he goes over to Theo and says, "Sir, may I bother you 1 second to tell you about the Shakespearean play you were in, whereupon you had the lead part and forgot every word, walked around the stage saying, 'Forsooth, forsooth, forsooth.' Your mother stood up at the end of that play and said, 'That's my baby. That's my baby.'" And Rudy says, "Hey, Mom came to my dance recital, but I was good." And Cliff burst her little bubble. He says, "No, you weren't, dear. See, I'm telling you guys, you're going to this mall and you're going to root for your mom's squash." And Rudy asks, "Dad, can I ask you something? Do we have to eat the squash for dinner?" And Cliff says, "If Mom wins, they'll keep the squash there on display at the mall for a month. And maybe a world tour." So Theo is confirming this. He's like, so if the squash wins, we don't have to eat it. And Cliff says no. And the kids begin to yell, go squash, go squash, go squash. And we arrive to the mall, right? And we're at the squash competition. And Vanessa says, wow, so this is a squash show. This is more exciting than I thought it would be. And Rudy says, me too. You know, they're being sarcastic, right? And Theo adds in, Mom, I'm very, very proud of this squash. It's really representing the Huxtable name. Like, he's clearly sucking up, right? And Cliff says, aren't your children so supportive, dear? And Claire laughs and says, your father put you up to this, didn't he? And Rudy quickly says, yeah. And Cliff says, no, why would you say something like that? And Rudy says, well, you told us to always tell the truth. And Cliff says, yeah, but I didn't tell you to tell the truth at the wrong time. And Theo cuts in and says, Mom, I gotta be honest. I can't really get excited about a room full of squash. So is it okay if we cruise around the mall for a while? And Claire says, Cliff, I really don't think it would hurt to cut him loose for a little while, right? And Cliff says, okay, we'll be back here in a half an hour. And take your little sister with you. And Vanessa says, Dad, she's going to slow us up. And Theo says, yeah, we want to have some fun. Like, you know, why would we want to take her? And Cliff says, make up your minds. You want to cruise with your little sister, or would you like to watch squash? And of course they agree, because they don't have much of a choice now, right? So the kids walk off and Cliff is hyping up his wife. He's telling her, yeah, Claire, you got it. I'm looking at this other squash and it's pitiful. And Claire says, well, it would be nice to have my squash acknowledged. And while this is happening, Mr. Kirby is walking in with his squash and he's keeping his hidden. And Cliff is like, well, I think I'll go over and see what my man, you know, has under this cover, right? And Cliff walks over there to go speak to Mr. Kirby and whatnot. And Mr. Kirby says, you want to look at my squash, don't you? And Cliff says, well, what I was wondering was why you had it covered with the sheet. And Mr. Kirby says, it's for protection. You see, my squash is very sensitive, you know. When I was growing it, I awakened it every morning with some cool jazz licks. Ba-da-bop-bop diddly-doo. He starts doing it and everything, right? And Cliff thinks this guy's a psycho, right? He's like, oh, so your squash likes jazz. And Mr. Kirby says, oh, you know it, Daddy-O. Calling him Daddy-O because he believes that's the black slang. But this is the 80s. We're actually out of the jive talking era, right? But this Mr. Kirby, he doesn't know that, you know? And Mr. Kirby tells Cliff, he's like, you know, I've been in this competition for 14 years and I've lost every year. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got to get back to Etna. So stay cool, man. And dismisses Heathcliff Huxtable like he's some peasant, right? Now remember, you guys do your history on Bergen County, New Jersey, right? You guys got to do your history on that area, right? And Cliff tries to take a peek at the squash, but he doesn't see it, of course, right? And now we're in the mall and Theo is young and hip. He says, okay, the record store is to the left. Follow me. And Vanessa says, but Nathan's is that way and I want to go look at some clothes. And Rudy says, no, I want to go to the toy store. And Theo says, come on, you guys. We've only got 20 minutes. We have to decide where we're going and get there. I got a plan. I'm the oldest, so we'll do what I want to do. And Rudy says, that plan stinks. And Vanessa... Okay. All right. Now, on my channel, we always talk about the Poon Hound. And rightfully so, right? But Vanessa Mariana Huxtable is a certified peen hound. Yes, a peen hound. Vanessa loves attention from boys, men, whatever age group she's at the time of the rant. You know, whatever season the show is at, of course. And Vanessa, she's like, oh my, it's him. He's here. And Theo says, who? Because, see, he doesn't see one member from New Edition in his mall. He's trying to figure out why his little sister is getting moist in the middle, right? And Vanessa says, him? Danny Brenner. And Theo isn't impressed by this chump. He says, isn't that the guy you talk about on the phone? The same guy you said is ugly? And Vanessa says, yes, but that's when he was going with Donna Gaffney. They broke up. And Theo says, oh, so he isn't ugly anymore, I guess, right? And Vanessa says, just look at him. Oh, my. Theo, I have to go meet him. And Theo says, well, go over there then. Like, why are you telling me? See, I'm trying to get this new Keith Sweat album so I can bump uglies with Justine. And Vanessa says, I can't. He's just too cute. I'm a pain hound just like Denise, so you have to help me. Please, you have to help me. And Theo says, Vanessa, what am I supposed to do? And Vanessa says, go over there and have a key made. See, because Danny cuts keys in the 80s like Rayful Edmond. Do your research on Rayful Edmond. But anyway, Vanessa's like, look, go over there, then I'll follow and we can have a conversation. So Theo tells Vanessa, that's dumb. And Vanessa's so infatuated with Teen Ping, right? She says, okay, I'll make you a deal. If you help me with this, you can leave Rudy with me and you can go to the record store and get that Keith Sweat tape so you can make Whoopi with Justine. And Theo says, okay, say no more. And meanwhile, Rudy is just watching this and she jumps in and says, how come you two get to make the deal? I want to make a deal. And Theo and Vanessa tells Rudy, like, look, you got your deal when we let you come with us. Now we see Theo walk over to the counter and Danny asks, can I help you? And Theo says, yeah, I need a copy of this made. And Danny is about to help out Theo and here come Ping Luster herself. The Ping Luster, right? Vanessa, she's craving it. She walks over there all loud talking about, hi Theo, what are you doing at the mall? And Theo plays along saying, well, I had the day off so I figured why not have a key made? And Danny notices this big face girl and says, hi, you're Vanessa Huxtable. And Vanessa says, right, we're in the same class. And Theo says, hey, and you're both in the mall today. Unbelievable. And Vanessa says, I didn't know you knew how to make keys. And Danny, he says, yeah, I can make 3 or 4 at a time. And Vanessa hopping on talking about, really? You must be a genius. Nobody can do that. As if she didn't come from one of the most powerful black families in Brooklyn, right? She goes on saying, geez, you're really good with that machine. And Danny says, thanks. It only took me a couple hours to learn how to use it. Now, while this is happening, Rudy stepped off to go pet a random animal in the mall. I didn't even know pets were allowed in the malls in the 80s. But once again, you do your research on Bergen County. I have a rant to continue. But yeah, Rudy stepped off on Theo and Vanessa. And Vanessa is still acting impressed by Danny. She asks, so what's that machine do? And Danny's acting like he owned a damn shop. He says, oh, this is for engraving on metal. And then asks Vanessa, would you like your name on your keys? Which is groundbreaking technology during this time. Understand that, it's the 80s, right? And Vanessa's eating it up. She's like, oh, you engrave too? Whoa. And Danny asks her, what would you like, print or script? And Vanessa says, that's a hard decision. I may have to stay here a while and think about it. And Theo starts to notice that Rudy has vanished. And Vanessa doesn't because her mind is on Ping, right? And Theo says, Vanessa, where's Rudy? And now Vanessa is concerned, right? But what's always thrown me off is this guy, Danny. He don't even care to help them look for their sister, right? Like Vanessa was just wrapping you up. You showed interest. He don't even care. He didn't even follow up on a possible oral love he could have got from Vanessa, if you guys know what I mean, right? He just stays in that booth and continues to make New Jersey's minimum wage at the time, right? And now we see Rudy roaming around the mall with not a dime on her, and a little Asian girl pops out and says, Rudy. And Rudy says, Kim? See, understand this. Rudy knows little Kim because they go to the same school. Yeah, the Huxtables don't live in the hood. When they want Chinese food, they go to a restaurant and they have options. So Rants understand why, you may be from your hood and whatnot and you grew up eating Chinese and you saw the little kids in the establishment and you never went to school with them, right? And them same kids went on to serve you the same Chinese food at an inflated price years later. But that's not Rudy Lillian Huxtable's life. But anyway, Kim asks Rudy, what are you doing here? And Rudy says, I'm trying to figure out where I'm at. Because, she's more than likely looking for the toy store, right? And then she asks Kim, what are you doing here? And Kim says, this is my dad's sushi bar. Are you allowed to go to the mall by yourself? And Rudy says, no, I was with my sister and brother, but they're stupid. And Kim says, yeah, I don't have a sister, but if I did, I bet she'll be stupid too. And then she invites Rudy inside the restaurant. And then we see Vanessa grab some random girl thinking it's Rudy. Them rich parents was on alert. And Theo tells Vanessa, oh man, I can't believe we lost her. And Vanessa says, we didn't lose her, we just can't find her. And Theo says, I hope she's alright. And Vanessa tells Theo about her trauma before the show aired, of course. She said, yeah, when I was 8, I once got lost in the supermarket. I wandered off and I went to go stare at the meat section because, that's what I like. And I felt like it was the end of the world. Tears was running down my face. I was so scared. I thought I'll never see Mom and Dad again. But then I saw all that corned beef and those hot dogs. And Theo says, this is your fault. You were supposed to keep an eye on her. Vanessa, the only reason this happens because you always been boy crazy. I knew your problem was going to get me in trouble one day. Then they hear over the mall's intercom, good afternoon, shoppers. The judging of the squash competition is about to begin near the main entrance. And Vanessa says, oh no, we can't go back there and we don't have Rudy. And Theo says, well, what if Rudy heard that and went back to Mom and Dad? She will tell them we weren't watching her. And Vanessa says, look, you're faster than me. Try to get to Mom and Dad before she does. And Theo says, good idea. You check the toy store. Which I feel like is something they should have already did. Like they should have did that first, right? But now we back at the competition and Claire says, now Cliff, you said 30 minutes. It's been 30 minutes and these children are not back yet. And Cliff says, well, Claire, this is the mall. And this is where time stands still, And now the judge is walking around and he gets to Mr. Kirby's table, who still has his squash covered. And the judge asks, do you mind removing it? And Mr. Kirby reveals his squash and the judge says, very nice indeed. And Mr. Kirby says, you mean it? Do you really mean it? And the judge says, yes, I really mean it, weirdo. And Mr. Kirby says, thank you. Etna, he really means it, honey. You heard it, didn't you? You heard it. You made him happy. I'm so glad. He's going into his little cycle, right? And Cliff and Claire sees this and he tells Claire, look, you got to do something about this presentation. Like, you need some color, like you need some spirit added to it. You need to do something to it. And Cliff pulls off this expensive coat that matches perfectly with his sweater. You guys didn't even notice it till I just said it. I already know. Now understand, right? He did some digging at Barney's to even find this coat and sweater combo, right? But he uses his jacket as like decoration for the squash. And Claire says, okay, Cliff, the sweater can stay, right? And Theo walks in and Claire says, hey, Theo, where's Vanessa and Rudy? And Theo says, oh, well, they're not here. And Cliff says, yeah, we know that. Where are they? And Theo says, oh, they're in the mall somewhere. And Claire says, you didn't stay with them? And Theo says, well, yeah, of course I stayed with them, but I gave them a little slack because sometimes it's better for sisters to get to know each other. And Claire says, Theo, please go get your sisters. The judging is already starting. Now Theo is back with Vanessa and he asks her, did you find her? Which is obvious because she's not with her, right? And Vanessa says, no, I looked everywhere. I looked at the toy store, the pet store, the video arcade. She wasn't anywhere. And they both come to the conclusion that they're going to get in trouble. And Vanessa asks Theo, well, what do you think Mom and Dad are going to do with us? Like, what you think they're going to do, And Theo says, oh, you're lucky. You're only 14. See, there's still laws to protect you, but I'm older. They can send me to the penitentiary. And Vanessa says, Theo, you're only 17. I don't think you're old enough for prison yet. And Theo says, yeah, but I'm old enough to go into service. And Dad's going to sign me up to the Marines. He's been waiting to do that for a long time. But he was just waiting for a major screw up like this one. And Vanessa says, look, we can have her paged on the PA system. And Theo says, we can't do that. If Mom and Dad hear it, they'll know she's lost. Then Vanessa says, okay, then let's talk to a policeman. And Theo says, okay, look, we'll search every corner of the mall. And if we don't find her, then we'll get a policeman. And then he can come with us when we tell Mom and Dad we can't find Rudy because we're going to need the protection. Now we see Rudy and Kim at the restaurant, and Rudy is impressed, and Kim tells her, oh, my dad can do all kinds of things with vegetables. And Kim father says, hi, Rudy. And Rudy says, hi, Mr. Agawa. And Kim father says, what brings you down here? And Kim says, Rudy was with her brother and sister, but they're stupid. And Kim father asks, are you lost? And Rudy is no dummy. She said, no, if I was lost, I'll go to a policeman and say, my name is Rudy Huxtable, and I live at 10 Sigwood Avenue. And Kim father says, okay, you're not lost, but I would feel better if your mom and dad knew where you were. And Rudy tells him, well, they're at the squash show. And Mr. Ogawa, he takes a break from work and minding his business to let the Huxtables know where Rudy is at, right? And now we see Claire say, Cliff, you know, these judges got to come on now. I'm starting to get a little nervous here. And Cliff says, don't worry about it. All you got to do is concentrate on this squash, and don't forget, behind every great woman is a great man. Then Kim and her dad and Rudy walks up, and Claire is like, hey, Tony, because they know him, obviously, right? Cliff probably delivered Kim, back in the day. And they ask, how's everything? And Kim's father says, Rudy was at my sushi restaurant. She tells me she's not lost, but I thought I would check with you. And Claire says, well, thanks very much. Where are Vanessa and Theo? That's when, of course, she asks him, and Rudy says, I don't know. And Cliff says, you mean they just let you wander off? And Rudy says they had better things to do. Then she asks if she can go back to the sushi bar. And of course, Tony agrees, because Rudy isn't like the other black kids from Brooklyn. She's still innocent and she don't steal. So Rudy leaves with Kim and her father, right? And as soon as they walk off, Claire says, okay, so we're going to have a word with Theo and Vanessa. And Cliff says, tell you what, when they show up, you just follow what I do, okay? And Claire agrees. And here comes Theo and Vanessa, right? And Cliff says, hey, how's everything? How's the mall been? And Theo says, listen, about Rudy, she's not here. And Cliff says, you're saying you don't know where she is? And Theo says, Dad, we were watching her, we really were, but we turned around and she wasn't there. So Cliff asks, so she's lost? And they both say, yeah. And Cliff says, oh, well, then let her stay lost. Now, she was told to stay with you two, and she didn't listen, and she went out there wandering around, so just leave her out there. And Claire jumps in and says that girl could get lost and never see us again, and it would teach her a lesson. And Cliff adds on, yeah, it would make it a lot easier on our lives too, I tell you that. And Vanessa says, don't you want us to look for Rudy? And Cliff says, we have 5 children, okay? 5 children. And by the time you get to the 5th one and you just keep telling them the same thing over and over again, you just get tired of talking to hard-headed people. So just leave her out there. And Claire says, yeah, your father is right. She knew she was supposed to stay with y'all. She didn't do it. Fine. Now she got to pay the penalty. And Theo says, yeah, Mom, but what if somebody grabbed her and ran off? And Cliff says, you think that might happen? And Vanessa says, yes, she's only 8. And Cliff says, then why didn't you think of that before you let the girl wander all over the mall? And Claire says, your sister's fine. She's in the sushi bar with her friend. And now Theo and Vanessa are relieved. And as soon as Vanessa finds out her sister isn't lost, she immediately asks if she can go over to the kiosk. Because, she's a fiend for the peen, right? And Cliff tells Vanessa, I think by the time this day is over, you won't have a place to put a key in. And Claire says, why don't you two just go outside and wait in the car for us? And Cliff adds on, no. Wait under the car, and dismisses them. And then the judges says, okay, the results are in for our 15th annual winter squash competition. In 3rd place, Estelle Drake. We see her run, go up there and get her award. The runner-up, Claire Huxtable. We see Claire got the red ribbon. And our blue ribbon winner, Norman Kirby. And of course, Mr. Kirby was happy. He's been in this competition for at least 14 years, right? And he finally won. And he gives his victory speech. And we never see Mr. Kirby again, because this show isn't about white winners, okay? Go watch any related American history if you want to see white people win, all right? This is the Cosby Show. All right, and now we back at the Huxtable house, and Cliff walks in the kitchen and says, "Make way for Claire Huxtable and her prize-winning squash torpedo." And Claire says, "I think it looks just as good with the red ribbon. Question is, now that it's all over, what do we do with it?" And Cliff says, "Oh, I think we ought to cut it up and eat it, dear." And Claire says, "Oh, Cliff, you can't." And Cliff says, "But dear, if we put it on the shelf, it's going to get old and those little black flies are going to come around." And Claire says, "Well, at least it wouldn't suffer." And Cliff says, "No, listen, you're talking to a surgeon. This thing will never fill it." And Claire says, "I just don't want to have to watch it." And Cliff says, "Well, you don't have to. Come on, little fellow. Torpedo, we're going to take you to a little private place." And of course he cuts it and cooks the squash, right? Because anybody who has ever watched this show already knows Claire Huxtable is rarely seen at work and is never seen cooking unless she's putting a huff-ass frozen pizza in the microwave for Rudy. But yeah, you see, Rudy was never lost because stuff like that don't happen to little rich black kids from Brooklyn and Bergen County, New Jersey. Once again, do your research on Bergen County, New Jersey and their residents. Like and subscribe. Randumb Rants.